Erik and Lyle Menendez get their chance at freedom 36 years after they killed their parents. They'll face separate parole hearings in San Diego. Erik today, Lyle tomorrow.
Among the millions of people watching, Robert Rand, author of The Menendez Murders. NBC4's Hetty Chang joins us live with Rand's insight on the hours leading into the parole hearings. Hetty.
Michael and Colleen, if the name Robert Rand sounds familiar to you, it's because he really is the expert on the Menendez brothers case. Not only as a journalist has he been covering the story for the better part of 40 years, as an author, he says he's been in constant communication with Erik and Lyle as recently as just a few days ago.
Erik and Lyle Menendez are solely focused right now on these parole hearings today and tomorrow. That's their number one focus. They're laser focused. That's their number one goal, is to get out of prison after 35 years of incarceration.
Are you able to share with us, though, how they are feeling going into these parole hearings?
Both Erik and Lyle Menendez, I think, are ready for these hearings. They've been prepping for several months. Originally, the hearings were supposed to take place in June, and they pushed it back to today and tomorrow. And I think that was to give them time to prepare with their lawyers.
We know that the parole board is going to be hearing the best of Erik and Lyle. We know that they're also going to be hearing the worst of Erik and Lyle. Are they prepared to go through all of that, to handle that?
I believe both brothers are prepared for whatever happens. They've both been subject to several trials. They've been under cross-examination from the DA's office, direct examination by their own attorneys, and so they've had a lot of experience at talking about, their crimes, talking about their remorse, and talking about their rehabilitation.
How would you characterize this moment where we're standing here today talking about the possibility of parole?
I always believed that this day would come. I didn't know when it was going to happen. I knew someday it would happen, and that day is today.
Yeah, our Robert Kovacic just mentioned this about 20 minutes ago. You may recall it was Rand that made that key discovery of finding that letter that Erik Menendez wrote to his late cousin, the letter that alluded to the alleged abuse at the hands of Erik and Lyle's father. The letter, Rand says, is a big reason as to why we are standing here today reporting on the possibility of parole for Erik and Lyle Menendez. Michael and Colleen, as we've been saying, much more to come. For now, back to you.
You're right about that, Hetty. Thank you. Our legal analyst, Royal Oakes, has been covering this case for decades now. He joins us with more on what we can expect with the parole hearings. Let's start with the protocol here. Not allowed to talk about what's happening or even if the parole hearings are going on. Is that typical? Why is that in this case?
Colleen and Michael, secrecy is paramount. You think of the court proceedings being open, either with cameras or without. The public is in there. This is different. This is a parole hearing where the board says it's private, it's confidential. We don't want any witnesses to be intimidated. So it's secret, but it's part of the marathon, not a sprint. I mean, it's been going on since 1989, and we have another marathon today.
Yeah, we've heard time and time again from the family. How much will this actually play in front of the parole board?
It's a crucial element for the family members to say we want them out. That's huge. Also, rehabilitation, remorse has been shown. Here's the problem. The brothers have both been designated as having a moderate risk of violent behavior after being released, if they're ever released. And that's usually the kiss of death. 4 times out of 5, the parole board says, moderate risk, we're leaving you in prison. And if they do say we're letting you out, 4 times out of 5, the governor says, not on my watch. So in that sense, it's tough. But the Menendez case is unique with the family matters and the allegations of abuse that could translate to success for them.
And we have to remember that regardless of what the parole board says, it's ultimately the governor who makes the final decision.
And
right?
that's part of the marathon. What happens is we'll get a decision in the next day or two on both brothers probably, but then the full parole board has 120 days to either rubber stamp it or say, no, we don't like that decision. Once that decision is made, the governor has a month and he can extend that 1 or 2 times. So no early decision in this case.
All right, we typically think of the brothers as one unit, but they are being parole board 2 separate cases here. So could one receive a yes and the other a no?
It's very unlikely. It does seem weird, though, doesn't it? Because we've seen them locked together. They're brothers. They appear at hearings together. And yet now the hearings are separate. Now, theoretically, somebody could say, well, Lyle's the older brother. He was controlling the younger brother. Let's keep him in jail, but let's free Erik. It ain't going to happen. They're represented by the same lawyers. Extremely unlikely you're going to get different results for the two siblings.
Hypothetically, if they are granted parole, what would be a timeline then?
So if they're granted parole, let's say in 3 months or so, because the governor and the board don't have to take the full amount, then they could be released before the end of the year, and then traditional parole considerations kick in. You know, no guns and no drugs, don't hang around with bad people. Folks have asked, well, could they room together since they're both former felons? Yeah. They probably could. The board would almost certainly say, we're going to make an exception. You can hang out with each other because you're brothers.
All right, you know, the governor could affirm, he could modify, or he could reverse here.
Right.
Correct? So the three options in front of him, will he put his stamp on this? Well,
that's a great question. And there's another option, actually. Theoretically, either the board or the governor could say, you know, this is interesting, but I want more evidence. I want more hearings, more witnesses. That's unlikely. And then, of course, people are speculating, would there be a political motivation? Would Governor Newsom be looking ahead? Do I want a question in the spring of 2028? Oh, Governor, you say you're tough on crime, but you allowed those two kids, those two men out who were murderers, including they killed their mom, even though she wasn't the abuser. That's all speculation. We don't know. Sometimes governors, for example, say no to Sirhan, even though the parole board said it's time, we'll release him. And then the governor says, not on my watch.
If they are granted parole, and let's say ultimately they do get out, what happens then? Do they go to a halfway house? Do they live with relatives? Walk us through that a little bit.
The real key is that they can't hang around with other former felons, and so they'd have a lot of freedom. There might be restrictions on travel, but we know from your reporting that they have plans. They want to go to campuses and talk about abuse. They want to get the Menudo boy band alleged victim. They want to talk about prison reform, and that's consistent with a good track record of rehabilitation. So even though that they have been designated as having a moderate level of risk, the psychologists say that Lyle is a narcissist and Erik is just vulnerable and does what other people want him to do. In spite of that problem, you have all of the allegations of abuse and the fact that the childhood abuse was brought into play and the law has changed, allowing them to have more of a chance for parole. You can't count their chances for parole out here. We just have to sit and wait as long as it takes.
And, you know, and the risk assessment was actually called on by the governor here. So, again, we talk about how much weight that actually holds with the parole commissioners.
Yeah, oh no, it's a huge factor because traditionally the parole board looks a whole lot at the risk level. For example, if you were designated as having a high risk level of parole, less than 1% of the time would a parole board spring somebody. Not a real surprise there. But yeah, the board looks at everything. I got to think that they're going to give us a quick decision once they do finish their hearing because they've already seen a mountain of paperwork and they probably aren't surprised by stuff that's happening today.
All right, we want to let our audience know our coverage of the Menendez brothers continues at 6 o'clock tonight. Join us tonight for the case Menendez Brothers. We'll break down the parole decision, what would come next, and highlight the impact of the high-profile saga. We'll be streaming it live tonight at 8 on our NBC Los Angeles News Channel or Roku, Peacock, and Samsung TV Plus.